Equipment failing. 3 soldiers dying. Young medic panicking. The emergency alarm screamed through Fort Carson Base Medical Center at 14:30 hours. Monitoring systems crashed in sequence. First, the cardiac monitors, then ventilators, finally, the IV pumps. 3 wounded soldiers from Afghanistan lay helpless as machines went dark throughout the ICU. Lieutenant Dr. Sarah Martinez, 6 months out of medical school, ran between rooms. All monitoring equipment is down. Backup power won't engage. Specialist Rebecca Johnson from the next bed called out, "Doctor, my patient's vitals are dropping fast." Corpsman David Lee shouted from room 3, "Lieutenant, we're losing blood pressure readings." Bob Mitchell, the 52-year-old janitor, stopped mopping and watched the chaos unfold. His weathered hands gripped the mop handle as memories of similar crises in combat zones flooded back. "Lieutenant, I know this equipment." She spun around, sweat beading on her forehead. "Hey, step back. This is serious." Bob's voice carried decades of authority. "Sergeant Major Robert Mitchell, combat medic, 25 years. Your soldiers are dying." The entire medical bay went dead silent. For 4 years, Bob had been invisible at Fort Carson Base Medical Center, arriving at 0600 hours, pushing his mop cart through corridors lined with medical equipment he knew better than the young staff operating it. Nobody knew the quiet janitor was Sergeant Major Robert "Doc" Mitchell, recipient of 2 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star, and 3 combat medical badges. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, 1 final deployment to Syria that had ended everything. The breaking point came during a mass casualty event when 37 soldiers were brought in simultaneously after a convoy ambush. Bob had worked 19 straight hours, performing field surgery, managing triage, keeping soldiers alive through sheer determination. But something broke inside him that day. PTSD symptoms made civilian emergency medicine impossible. The hypervigilance that kept him alive for 25 years wouldn't turn off. His marriage to Linda ended after 2 years of trying to cope. Their daughter Ashley, now in college, called occasionally, but conversations were strained. The janitor position at Fort Carson had been a compromise. He could stay near medicine without the life-or-death pressure that triggered panic attacks. 3 soldiers were fighting for their lives while Dr. Martinez frantically tried protocols that weren't working. Private First Class Miguel Santos, 20 years old, had lost both legs to an IED explosion. His cardiac monitors showed dangerous patterns that required immediate intervention, but the equipment was dead. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, 28 years old, with 2 young daughters, was recovering from gunshot wounds to the chest. His ventilator had stopped functioning, forcing manual bag ventilation that couldn't be sustained indefinitely. Sergeant Jennifer Lopez, 25 years old and 6 months pregnant, had suffered concussion and internal injuries from a mortar attack. Her fetal monitoring equipment was offline, leaving both mother and unborn child at risk. "The backup power won't connect," Sergeant Torres shouted, sweat dripping as he manually operated breathing equipment. "I can't get systems online." Bob saw the problem immediately, the same equipment failure he'd fixed dozens of times in field hospitals under fire. Simple connection issue that could be solved in minutes. "Ma'am, your power connection came loose," Bob said calmly. Dr. Martinez barely looked up from her frantic radio communication. "Sir, we need medical technicians, not custodial. I can fix it in 2 minutes." "You're a janitor." That's when Bob's voice changed, carrying the authority of decades in combat medicine. "I'm a sergeant major who kept soldiers alive for 25 years. Dr. Martinez stared, her clipboard clattering to the floor. "You're military?" "Combat medic. 3 deployments, Afghanistan, 2 Iraq, 1 Syria. Maintained this exact equipment under rocket fire in Kandahar." Sergeant Torres stopped his manual ventilation for a moment, his expression transforming. "Sergeant Major, why didn't you identify yourself?" Torres had served 2 tours himself and knew the weight of that rank. His father had been a career NCO, and he'd been raised to respect senior enlisted personnel. The realization that he'd been working alongside a decorated sergeant major for months without knowing hit him hard. Corpsman Lee moved closer, suddenly understanding. "Sir, you've been here 4 years. We never knew." Bob's explanation carried years of pain. "Because PTSD ended my medical career. Couldn't handle the stress anymore. This job keeps me close to medicine without triggering attacks." Dr. Martinez's medical school training hadn't prepared her prepare for this moment. Sergeant Major, you have medical experience? 25 years of field medicine. These soldiers are dying from a simple power connection problem I've fixed dozens of times. Bob moved toward the equipment. Your connection shook loose. In the field, we secure these systems because when they fail in combat, soldiers die within minutes. Bob's assessment was systematic. Power connections separated just enough to break contact, but not enough to show fault indicators. He knelt beside the backup power system, his movements confident, despite 4 years away from hands-on medical equipment. In Afghanistan, we dealt with this constantly. Sand, vibration, temperature, all cause connections to shake loose. Dr. Martinez watched as Bob's hands moved with practiced efficiency. How do you know this specific equipment? Deployed with this exact system to 3 different bases, learned every failure because equipment breakdown in combat means soldiers die. Bob explained while working. Connection just needs to be disconnected, cleaned, and reconnected with a tighter fit. Within 90 seconds, backup power was restored. Monitoring equipment hummed back to life throughout the ICU. Cardiac monitors showed stable rhythms. Ventilators resumed automatic operation. Bob stood and dusted off his custodial uniform. Equipment secured. All backup systems operational. Dr. Martinez stared at the monitoring displays. Sergeant Major, how did you learn to diagnose equipment failures so quickly? Combat teaches you to identify and solve problems fast. When soldiers are dying, you don't have time for troubleshooting manuals. With equipment functioning normally, Bob's attention shifted to patient care details. The young medical staff had missed during the crisis. Lieutenant, Private Santos shows early signs of complications in his residual limb, Bob observed. His pain patterns suggest nerve issues that need immediate attention. Dr. Martinez moved to examine the patient. How can you tell from observation? 25 years of treating amputee patients. You learn to read subtle signs before they become critical. Bob continued. Staff Sergeant Torres needs repositioning to prevent pneumonia. His breathing patterns suggest early fluid buildup. Sergeant Torres looked up with new respect. Sergeant Major, I had no idea about your medical background. In combat medicine, equipment repair and patient care go together. You fix systems to save lives, then monitor patients to ensure treatment works. Dr. Martinez realized she was receiving a masterclass in field medicine. Sergeant Major, would you walk me through your assessment? Bob's systematic approach reflected decades of experience. Combat medical assessment follows priorities. Immediate life threats first, then complications prevention. Experience teaches you to recognize patterns and predict problems before they become critical. 30 minutes later, Colonel James Patterson, base medical commander, arrived in response to emergency reports. Lieutenant Martinez, what's the current status? Dr. Martinez stood at attention. Sir, equipment failures resolved and all patients stable. Sergeant Major Mitchell provided expertise that restored backup power systems. Colonel Patterson looked confused. Sergeant Major Mitchell, I don't have a Sergeant Major Mitchell on my medical staff. Sir, Bob stepped forward. Sergeant Major Robert Mitchell, retired, currently assigned to custodial services. The colonel examined Bob's uniform with growing understanding. Sergeant Major, what's your medical background? 25 years combat medic, sir. Multiple deployments, field hospital operations. Colonel Patterson's expression shifted. Mitchell, you're the medic who received the Silver Star for the FOB Charleston mass casualty event. Yes, sir. Why are you working custodial duties with your qualifications? Bob's response carried years of struggle. PTSD from final deployment made high-stress medical environments impossible, sir. Custodial work allowed me to remain near medicine without triggering symptoms. 2 weeks later, Colonel Patterson called Bob into his office. Sergeant Major Mitchell, your intervention prevented 3 soldier casualties. We're creating a position that utilizes your expertise without direct patient care pressure. Medical equipment specialist, training responsibility for equipment maintenance and emergency technical support. Dr. Martinez had recommended the change. Sir, Sergeant Major Mitchell has field experience that medical school can't teach. His knowledge would enhance our emergency response capabilities. The position allowed Bob to contribute his medical medical knowledge while avoiding the patient care stress that triggered PTSD symptoms. 6 months later, Bob was training young medics and preventing equipment failures through systematic maintenance programs. His renewed sense of purpose had dramatically improved his mental health. Young medical officers sought his guidance. "Sergeant Major, how do we handle equipment failures in field conditions?" Dr. Martinez, now significantly more experienced, incorporated Bob's methodologies into training protocols. Sergeant Major Mitchell taught us that medical expertise exists in unexpected places. We learned to ask questions and listen before making assumptions. Bob's story prompted policy changes at multiple installations. Other bases began identifying veteran medical expertise among their civilian populations. Ashley visited regularly, their relationship rebuilt through his renewed sense of purpose. She brought her boyfriend to meet him. "Dad, this is the man I told you about. He saved soldiers' lives." Bob's reflection on his journey. Combat medical training doesn't disappear when trauma changes your capacity for direct patient care. The knowledge remains available to serve soldiers in different ways. His message resonated throughout the military medical community. Military medical expertise continues serving soldiers regardless of current uniform. Experience doesn't retire. It adapts to serve where it can. 3 soldiers went home to their families because a janitor remembered his oath to never leave a fallen comrade. Dozens more would benefit from his ongoing training and expertise. Dr. Martinez's final assessment captured the lesson. We learned that respect and recognition shouldn't require a crisis. The most qualified person in any room might be the one everyone assumes has the least to offer. Sometimes the most qualified medical expert is the one everyone assumes knows the least. The person cleaning the floors might have the combat experience needed to save lives when everything else fails. Never underestimate the quiet ones carrying invisible wounds. The veteran with the mop might be exactly the expert you need when soldiers' lives are on the line. True service doesn't end when trauma changes your capacity. It continues in whatever form allows you to keep the promise. Leave no one behind. The most powerful recognition isn't always a medal or promotion. Sometimes it's simply being allowed to serve again, being asked for your opinion, being treated with the respect your experience has earned. If you enjoyed this story, click the like button and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.